Okay, so thank you for joining us for our first LCAP meeting for the new school year. We have started this process earlier than normal, and typically we have had our first LCAP meeting in January. And the reason why we're starting this process early this year is we are going to start a new 3-year cycle with our LCAP. And we will get into detail with that as far as what that means for our LCAP process this year. But we did want to start early to get more input from our stakeholders about the process and the plan. I will be leading tonight's discussion. Joining me tonight is Dr. John Paramo, our superintendent, to give a little bit of discussion to our budget for our LCAP. With that, we'll go ahead and get started on our first slide tonight. So those of you that are not familiar with the LCAP, I wanted to provide some background and a little bit of information about what we're doing. So the LCAP is our local control and accountability plan. It's a 3-year plan. We're on year 3 of our current plan. So at the end of this year, a lot of our metrics and some of our goals that we've set, we are able to measure those or kind of come to a close to see if we've met those. We will have the opportunity to reset and reevaluate our goals, our action items, and our metrics that we use in our plan. The LCAP provides ideally an opportunity for all of our educational partners to look at our programs and services and identify what our local needs are and try to best use our supplemental funding to address those needs, but also help establish the vision direction that our community sees for our schools and our students, and guide this process to help establish what those goals and vision is. LCAP is a tool for educational agencies to do all these things and specifically leverage resources to improve student outcomes. We'll get into the goals of our LCAP as well as the 8 state priorities that we have to meet with our plan. But a couple of specifics about what's included in the plan. So the components of the LCAP are one single document, and they contain the overview of the budget for parents. And what this is a 1 or 2 page overview of how we spend not only our LCAP funds specific to LCAP, which are supplemental dollars, but also a snapshot of our LCFF budget in general, or overview of our entire school budget. So it's trying to simplify and make that very visible and transparent to our parents and community. We create a plan summary, which outlines the process that we use to get input from various educational partners, the process that we use to develop the plan, and also the the logic and reasoning and discussion behind why we identified specific goals for our school district and how we intend to reach those goals. Part of that process is engaging in educational partners, which you are all a part of tonight. This is going to be one part of a series of meetings that we have about our LCAP. We also take our LCAP to, yes.
I'm sorry, this is Rebecca Harris. We have 2 requests in the chat from the interpreters to please slow down.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks
for helping with that.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I appreciate the help.
Yeah.
When reaching out to educational partners, this committee tonight, which includes some parents, students, teachers, really is open to the public, this meeting. We also take our LCAP or discuss our LCAP with our administration. We do separate meetings with our bargaining units. We also take the LCAP and the process to our SELPA, which is the regional, sort of a regional support network for our special ed students. And we kind of discuss a lot of these ideas throughout the district with various staff. And so that's engaging our educational partners as part of this process. We develop goals and actions, and typically LCAP goals are going to mirror the district goals that the board is a big part of developing those goals, our school board. Under those goals are specific actions, and we will share those tonight and go over what our actions are. And actions are basically how we intend to budget and spend our money to support students. A part of the LCAP that every district has to account for in their LCAP plan is how they increase or improve services for specific subgroups. Those subgroups being foster youth, English learners, and low-income students. And so why we have to increase services for those students is because those are the students that generate the supplemental dollars we use for our LCAP. And we'll get into that specifically in a slide or two. But this is kind of the broad overview of the LCAP process, the requirements. Tonight, we are just giving a little background for anybody who's participating in the LCAP for the first time. But a reminder, this is the start of a 3-year process, so it's important to circle back on all of these items. So the start of a new 3-year cycle, goals must align to state priorities and our local district vision and board goals. Another part of the 3-year cycle is to establish metrics. Metrics we will report out on in January when we have the first state reports coming back to us about a lot of these items. And these metrics help us determine, are our action items making progress towards the goals that we set for our district. Action items are subject to review based on a couple of items, including budget, demographics, past performance, and whether or not we can see an increase in services for those subgroups, specifically foster youth, homeless, and socioeconomically disadvantaged. Most importantly, the creation of the LCAP must include input from educational partners representing the demographics of the school district and populations that receive these increased and improved services. So we're doing some specific outreach to these families and students. We are also take the LCAP to our DLAC committee, which is specific for our our English learners and parents to get their input as well. So these are the state priorities that our LCAP must address or must be included in our LCAP process. And these 8 state priorities include basic services, the implementation of state standards, which at the time when this was created, we were looking at Common Core standards, but we're continuing to always implement and improve and look at new textbooks as part of that process. Student engagement, which looks at attendance, school climate, student outcomes, so specifically performance on state assessments and other benchmarks, parent engagement, the schools, the district in this process, course access, especially at high school. We do not have barriers for students to take specific courses, and of course, other student outcomes. So our BUSD board goals, these are our local goals set forth in the LCAP. And I'm just going to highlight what each goal addresses is. Number one, students will be college and career ready in via high quality instruction of state standards. So this is really the core goal for our instructional programs and student performance. Goal 2 is for students to be physically, emotionally, and mentally healthy and supported through parent involvement. This is looking at the whole child, educational services, supporting all the intangible items for students to be successful in school. Goal 3 is to recruit and retain quality employees. And you will see we have some action items geared towards improving the work environment as well as the capacity of our staff. And then goal 4 is efficient and effective operations as measured by appropriate facilities. So we do have metrics that measure that. We don't have any specific action items in our LCAP, specific to the LCAP, that geared towards that goal. But we do support that goal through general fund dollars. So this slide is circling back on where we started as far as the supplemental dollars that we use for LCAP are really generated by these subgroups. So you can see our free and reduced meal program, foster students, homeless students, and English learners are the categories that generate these additional dollars to districts. You can see the historic numbers of these populations. I want to note that the current numbers for this school year are projections, so we're still in the process of finalizing what our unduplicated pupil count will be for this year. But our concern with this, along with us as a district, is that we've been experiencing declining enrollment across the board. And so our concern with especially these subgroups is that declining enrollment could and very well impact our subgroup numbers when it comes to generating these additional dollars. Another thing worth noting when it comes to Burbank Unified School District is that there are other districts that get considerably more dollars through the LCAP and supplemental funding process because they have higher populations or a higher percentage, to be more specific, of students who are in these categories. The state funds those districts with high percentages of unduplicated students at a higher level than districts who have a lower percentage. Those are called concentration dollars, and Burbank Unified does not qualify for concentration funding. We only receive the supplemental funding in addition to our base funding from the state. The last question we usually receive on this slide is, what does unduplicated pupil mean? And what that means is we very often have students who meet multiple subgroup criteria. So we may have a student who is an English learner and also receiving free and reduced meals at our schools. That student does not count more than once. That student only counts once towards our funding. So the state has coined this group of students as unduplicated, meaning they don't count twice if they are in multiple categories. I'm going to pause just for a second to make sure we haven't missed any questions in the chat or in our live audience. Yes, Ms. Emily Weisberg. Correct. So they will in a lot of our state reporting, they will count in those multiple subgroups when it comes to like academic performance and other areas. But specifically when it comes to funding, we only receive dollars for that kid once. So the question was these unduplicated students, about them only being counted once. They do contribute in multiple categories when it comes to other indicators, but when it comes to funding, we only get funding once per child, we don't get multiple funding. Okay. So moving on, we're now to our budget slide, and I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. John. We left off with the budget for our LCAP.
Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can see the slide. We wanted to strategically give you a revenue picture of how the LCAP is funded, and we wanted to do that over a span of a few years. So if we start at the top, you can see that in 2021, 2022, we had carryover dollars in the amount of $3,265,474. So why did we have so much carryover? Well, if you remember, during COVID, we had specific funding sources that were one-time money. So we were able to appropriately fund some of the LCAP items out of those one-time funds, which meant that we were saving money in the LCAP plan, and those dollars were carrying over to the following year. That is what you see there in that line, that we had an addition of $3,265,474 because we didn't spend it the previous year and it was carrying over. So in 22-23, we have revenue of $10,449,853. Estimated expenditures almost 11.6 million. So estimated carryover 22-23 is 2,118,008. So you can see that from 21-22, the carryover was 3 million. Now in 22-23, the carryover is 2 million. Okay, so let's take a look at how this looks for 23-24. 23-24 projected revenue is 10,274,083. Estimated expenditures $12.3 million. So what is our estimated carryover 23-24? $66,011. So you can see that the carryover is diminishing because we are no longer using one-time funding to cover LCAP items. It is this loss in carryover dollars that is going to dictate for us in our LCAP plan areas which we will have to cut. So that is going to be continuing discussion as we move through LCAP, but I wanted you to understand the budget. I wanted you to understand why the carryover dollars are diminishing and explain that, you know, we are going to need to look at in this year, not only adding features to the LCAP to help provide for our English learners, our foster youth, our homeless youth, but we're also going to have to also look at cutting some items because we don't have those carryover dollars anymore. That was a kind of a cushion that we've been using the last couple of years.
Pause for just a second to see if there's questions from virtual attendees or here in person. Thank you, Dr. Brown. So now we're getting into the action items, and part of the reason we want to go through these is these are the action items we have in place for this year. These are the action items for the most part that we've had throughout the 3-year plan that we will be discussing throughout this process this school year, as far as what we would like to see, what we want to prioritize, what we think is essential to our students and our programs, so that we can make determinations for next year and the next 3 years, ideally, what we want to have in place to support our students. And so this first slide is looking just at action items specific to goal 1, which, if you recall, goal 1 is our academic goal, instructional goal. And so I'm not going to go through these line by line, but we have action items specific to elementary class sizes. We have action items to support dual immersion, and then action items here to help assist with our designated ELD teachers or English learners as secondary. We do have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you tell me when you might know what the cuts might be and what your time frame is?
Sure. So we had a question in person, and then I'll be able to get to the virtual question in a second. The question in the audience in person was regarding the class size reduction and what those numbers are, what that means in classrooms. And we have Dr. Knapik here for our elementary to speak to that. So Dr. Knapik responded, the goal is to go from 32 to 28, and this funding allows us to stabilize those classrooms at 28, whereas they would otherwise be at 32. Go ahead and repeat your question from our virtual attendee.
Yes, I wanted to know when will we know what those cuts are going to be, and what is your time frame of letting everyone know?
I'm going to go ahead and let Dr. Paramo respond to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So we just received yesterday new data from the state regarding the number of students in Burbank Unified School District that comprise our unduplicated pupil count. So what I can tell you is that what we were looking at was about $1.5 million in cuts. However, with this new data, it looks like we're definitely going to need to cut, but probably not as much as we thought. At our next LCAP meeting, we'll give you specific numbers. I can't do that today because, like I said, we just got that information. So in terms of what are potential cuts, there will be a process by which our community gets to contribute their ideas and thoughts about where we could make those cuts. The district will also provide areas where we think we can minimize and reduce without impacting our instructional programs. For example, there are certain things in LCAP that we can move over. We can fully fund, but move over to a different funding source. So the general public wouldn't know that. And that is something that the district will come forward and show and explain. We can still keep this item, but instead of paying for it out of LCAP, we can move it under this funding source because it's appropriate. And we'll give those updates to you in the preceding meetings.
That was a great question, and I think appropriate to ask before we go through these next series of slides. And part of what I want to share is we will be sending out a survey this week after this meeting specifically for parents, the public, anyone that wants to give input on this process to look at these action items. The survey will ask a couple of questions. It'll ask you to prioritize items that you feel are essential, that need to be high priority, potentially increased in funding if we see a significant need. You'll also be asked for items that you feel like could be condensed or maybe reimagined or repurposed to try to use those dollars a different way, or to change the funding a little bit. Maybe we can do the same thing and be a little more cost effective. The third question you will be asked in the survey is items that you feel like could be removed, things that are not a high priority. We have other services or other mechanisms to provide these supports. These are the items that should be looked at if we do have to indeed make significant cuts to the budget. So great question. And as we go through these next couple slides, it's important to ask questions about these action items so you have a better understanding. And know that's part of the survey that'll go out as far as seeking your input when you look at these items on that survey. So the next slide is still goal 1. These are still academic instructional goals. And items on here include extended learning in the summer for our elementary English learners, professional development. Notice that that one has asterisks on it as far as it reducing burden on the general fund. So this is an item that needs to be paid regardless. So it being placed here reduces burden on that budget. There's other items including some TOSA positions that provide assistance to teachers, professional development. There's response to intervention teachers at the elementary level that support students who need intervention to stay on grade level, psychologists at the middle school, teacher support for instructional technology, as well as behavior specialists. Just taking a minute to make sure we don't have questions about any of these items. And if so, we can return to those. Still goal 1, we have English learner program. This is a requirement for our LCAP. So this one is really not eligible to be considered for removal or altering. This is the base program to support English learners. And we're required to provide at minimum this base program. And it does need to be budgeted out of the LCAP. We have full-time curriculum specialists at all of our elementary schools. We have library coordinators at our elementary schools, as well as targeted support for at-promise students who are in our GATE programs. These are all of our instructional academic action items under goal 1. So we're going to go ahead and move forward to goal 2, which is specific to the whole child and educational services or ed services. So items included in goal 2 include our counselors at both the high school and middle school, teachers at Monterey, and admin at Monterey. Monterey is our continuation high school for students who are behind credits to graduate. We have community day school teachers and instructional assistants. Community day school is a school for students who are struggling with attendance, struggling with behavioral issues, or have gone through some sort of suspension expulsion process. Family services, Burbank Family Services Counseling Program is at both of our high schools and provides counseling services to all of our students ongoing. And then our initial credit school, initial credit summer school program. Moving to other items in goal 2, we have another item for summer school, and this is specific not to initial credit, but to credit recovery for students to be able to recover credits over the summer. We have at-risk intervention specialists at both the elementary and secondary. We have PBIS training, which is our PBIS is positive behavioral intervention supports. We have a homeless at-risk youth specialist who works specifically with those populations to support them in their school programming. DEI supplemental materials. These are providing novels or other literature of diverse authors, diverse ethnicities, cultures, making those available to students. And then our school climate and mental health surveys, which also is a requirement that we provide those surveys and gather that information as far as part of the LCAP process, but also reporting as our local indicators to the state. So pause one more second. And now we move on to goal 3. So that was the end of our goal 2 ed services. Goal 3 is specific to teacher training, recruitment of high quality teachers and staff. And so you'll see a series of DEI goals, DEI being diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have a consultant, professional development, a separate consultant that helps specifically with mental health issues or situations. And then we have DEI site lead stipends and collaboration time for our leads at our school sites to collaborate and prepare discussions, professional development trainings with the school site staff on diversity, equity, inclusion. So those are all items geared towards recruitment and improving our staff. Those are all of our action items and goals. So we did have a 4th goal, the maintaining high quality facilities and educational campuses. There is not funding in our supplemental dollars specific to that goal, so we didn't include a slide on that for action items because there are none. So our 3 goals that we support through action items: goal 1, academics; 2, the whole child, mental health, well-being; and then our recruitment and retainment of high quality staff. So again, I want to repeat, we will be sending out a survey. That is a very valuable mechanism for us to gather input from all of our educational partners. There will be a series of questions that allow you to prioritize all of these action items so that we have the information we need when it comes time to making some budget decisions, or when we start the discussion and we have more specific numbers about what we're looking at for a budget this year. And let me rephrase that, not this school year, but next school year. So the plan that we have in place is going to be in place for this school year. We have already budgeted those dollars and we'll fulfill our action items through this school year. This is an opportunity to start planning for next year and ideally the next 3 years as part of this 3-year process. So on this slide, you see some LCAP resources. So if tonight's discussion really stimulated some interest for you to do a deep dive on everything LCAP, you can see we have state resources, local resources for you to dive in, educate yourself, come prepared to contribute to this conversation on how we can support our students, and specifically support those students that are those populations that need the most support. So with that, we open it up to discussion. Any questions? We can go back to previous slides and provide some more detail, but do know we will be gathering that input from you via survey. We will have a subsequent meeting in December, on December 13th, where we will share the results of that survey and discuss the survey in more detail, along with a little more detail about what we think our budget will look like for next year going forward. I do have a hand up in person. Yeah. Yeah.
So, the point of the survey is to give community members an opportunity to not just to identify the areas they think are a top priority, but also to identify areas where they think we'll be able to cut. So when we present that data, we will also be presenting data from the district on where we think we could cut. And that's really an important thing to happen in December, because when you talk about cutting what we originally thought was $1.5 million, what you're talking about is cutting staff, cutting people. And if you're going to cut people, you have to do that very early at the start of the new year, because there are timelines we have to meet in order to reduce our working force. So the December meeting is really key for us at the district level, because the outcome of that meeting will signal to us what we need to bring forward to the board as potential areas where we're going to have to decrease staff. Sure. So once we can determine what the dollar amount is that we have to cut, and we identify those areas, then the preceding meetings are focused on what are we going to keep in the plan, what items do we need to readjust, what items do we need to reallocate money to. So normally we don't have this first part. Normally we don't have the first part of identifying dollars and places to cut. That is what we have to do this year. But the rest of the meetings are centered on what is our plan going to look like? What are we supporting? How are we supporting? What dollars are we going to put to those supports that are specifically tied to our targeted subgroups, which are foster, our homeless, and our English language learners? Yeah, we purposely set it up in here, and we're purposely producing a hybrid option to get more participation, so it's more discussion based. No, that's a very fair question. So the question is that usually we get a presentation, and it's really not seeking input to change things. It's to tell the story about what's happening and what we're doing. And that's absolutely correct, because once you establish your LCAP plan, then that is your roadmap for 3 years. And so there's very little that changes in terms of the plan, because what we are required to do by law is to follow that plan for 3 years and show that what we're putting in place is working. If for whatever reason we're investing a lot of dollars on one of our action items that we decided we wanted and it's producing no fruit, then we're able to take a look at what we can do to readjust. But those are the exception and not really the rule. So this process this year is different and more discussion based because we're developing the plan that will be in lockstep for the next 3 years. I think that this year, all meetings are important and that parents should be at all of them. The next meeting is a meeting where we really need to isolate areas of reduction. I would think that that is a topic that parents would want to be involved in. In terms of the future, I feel like those are still meetings where parents want to be involved because it is the opportunity for us to identify what we think might be appropriate to help and support our more vulnerable kids. And so I think that's really important. And this is the opportunity to do that because next year we're not going to have an opportunity to change our LCAP plan, or at least not change it in any significant way, or the preceding year or the preceding year. This is our opportunity right now.
Yeah. So the question was, hypothetically looking at the number of action items, not only should we look at just what we cut, but maybe should we cut a little deeper so that we have the opportunity to add new items later on in the LCAP process.
So I will just give you one example. We know from the data that we have significantly more newcomers to our school district. That is just a fact. And I think that schools in general in California are seeing that. A lot of that has to do with what's going on around the world. And we are getting more students from the Ukraine and from Russia. We are getting more students from the countries in the East, and they're coming here and their kids are coming here, and we can see those numbers. So it's a new dynamic. It's not the same that it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago. So the need for specific services to help these kids seems to me to be a priority. So how are we going to address the needs of those kids when it requires more money? Well, the answer is that we have to cut deeper in order to fund other areas that are required, because this plan is specific to foster youth, homeless, and English language learners. So that is where the dynamics come in. And that's why we need to, the next meeting is important for so many reasons, but I think for the general public, what will happen at the next meeting is we'll have more definitive numbers as to how much we need to cut based on the new information we got yesterday regarding the increase in unduplicated pupils, which means more dollars for us. I can just assure this community that before getting the email yesterday about our unduplicated count going up, what I was prepared to say to the community is we need to cut $1.5 million. We are still going to need to cut, and we're still going to need to cut on a large amount, but I don't think it's going to be $1.5 million. That's the information that I need to get to you by the next meeting that's critical. And also looking at the survey data and figuring out where we might be able to make some cuts.
We had a question in the chat. Question is, question on the survey. Once you get the results on the survey, are you making decisions on what the majority of people say in your survey, or would you still go to the way of what the cabinet meeting decides?
Yeah, I think it's we will look at the data together as a community, and we will take community input and suggestions on where they think those cuts can be made. And it will be in conjunction with what our site administrators and our other stakeholder groups, including the Board of Education, are comfortable with.
Just to give some more information about the rest of our meetings for the LCAP process this year. So we talked a little bit already about the December meeting and looking closer at the budget and where we need to make adjustments right now for next year. In the spring, we'll be diving into each of our goals in more detail. And part of the process that we need to be doing with the 3-year cycle is to look at our metrics that we've established to measure, are we being successful in what we said we want to do? And are we meeting those goals? If we are not being successful or we're not meeting those goals, do we need to reevaluate how we're spending that money? So that's a part of that process. It's also a part of the process for parents, community, state, educational partners to help us identify metrics we should be looking at to help us evaluate, are we being successful in this process? So want to clarify that that's part of that process there. It's just critical at this time with the timing of this process that we identify if we do need to make reductions to know where those are so that we can follow through with our timelines. The goals we'll look at specifically will be a meeting in January on instruction and our academic goals and how we're progressing in those. Then we'll look at goal 2, the educational or whole child and our metrics and that goal and seeing, are we making progress towards what we intended to do with those as well. And then part of that conversation is looking at both the metrics and our success, but also what are the action items? What are the things we're funding and are they making the progress we wanted to see? We have a question.
Yes, that's potentially true, but what I would share with you. Oh, yes.
So the question was, there are items that are asterisk that identify that they reduce the burden of the general fund. And the last part of that question. Yeah, if that's correct. We're not looking at general funds in this through this process, but the question was, could we move those items out of the supplemental budget into the general fund to free up supplemental dollars?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I'm responding to the question appropriately and accurately. When we've moved items from the general fund into LCAP, they have to pass the test of it being eligible for LCAP. So yes, we have done that and it has created relief in the general fund, but those items have also met the criteria to count in supplemental dollars because those dollars are addressing the needs of our targeted subgroups. So the question is, can we move some LCAP items back to the general fund? Yes, yeah, we could do that. But what I want our community to understand is that in addition to cutting from LCAP, we're looking at the necessity of cutting $3 million from the general fund. So this is, it's probably not likely that we'll be able to manage that when we're having to cut the amount of dollars we're having to cut from both budgets.
Any other questions from our virtual attendees? And you're welcome to unmute to ask your question. Okay. So this meeting has been recorded. We will post it to our website. And so if you have family members, other colleagues, community members that you think would be valuable partners in this process, please share that information with them. We will send out the survey and the presentation in an email this week so that you can respond to the survey and also review the slides The slides will be translated for anyone who needs the slides to be translated. In addition to that, all of this information will be on our website, the busd.org/LCAP. Oh, we had something in the Q&A.
Just 1 second.
So we looks like we had a question in the Q&A that we may have missed. When will we know what the cuts will be? What is your time frame?
So practically speaking, if we need to take to the board any reduction in staffing, that needs to go to the board in early March. And so you have to backwards map from that point, because there's an entire process that needs to happen in order to get it to the first meeting, first board meeting in March. Therefore, we really need to have a solid idea of where we're going to cut or what we're going to cut by early January. So our December LCAP meeting is going to be critical. There could be some time in January to continue the discussion, but that's if you're looking for a benchmark, what I would say is our December meeting is going to be critical, and then we'll have to have a pretty solid plan in place in the beginning of January in order to do what we need to do.
So just want to welcome anybody with any further questions. You're always welcome to email myself, Dr. Paramo, or any of our district admins, any of those questions you may have. Oh, so the question about who will receive the survey will be blasted out. So if you receive the invitation to come tonight or attend tonight's meeting, you'll also receive the survey. And so that was blasted out to all of our parents and our staff, as well as community members that have asked to receive information or e-news, BUSD e-news. So it'll be sent out that way via email along with the presentation. It looks like we have a few other questions coming in, so just a minute. Yeah, we will make sure and work with to provide a translated survey as well. Thanks. That was a great question. What is the difference between general fund and LCAP? Well, LCAP is a plan for the district and how to spend supplemental dollars. But so I think the question really is the difference between general fund and supplemental fund. General fund is the money we receive from the state to run our district, all of our programs. And those are funded through ADA based on what grade span the student's in, how many days they attend school. That generates that general fund dollars. And that's base money to run our programs. ADA is average daily attendance. So we are only funded 4 days and that students are in school. We do lose funding when students are absent from school. Supplemental is different from that. Supplemental is additional dollars on top of that base funding. And those additional dollars, that supplemental fund, is generated specifically by the unduplicated student population. So the English learners, free and reduced lunch students, foster and homeless students are all counted in that unduplicated count. And depending on what our populations are in those subgroups will determine how many supplemental dollars we received to support them. So I hope that answers your question. Supplemental funds are also tied to ADA. So it's just additional money we receive for those students when they attend. The question was, what are we doing to increase the ADA average daily attendance and help with students who do not come as often? That's a really good question. It's been challenging to address post-pandemic. So we spent a year in distance learning, and then we have students that we want in our schools. We want them to come to school. We don't want them to be absent. But on the same hand, there's been county, state, national requirements that we have to meet as far as COVID concerns and following those policies and practices. And also, we don't want students coming to school sick. So that has been a challenging aspect. the last couple of years when it comes to ADA. But it's been a conversation I think we can circle back on and look at now that the climate's changing, and I think people's health for the most part isn't as significant at risk as it was in previous years. Did you want to add to that? No.
Yeah, there was a great question here in person regarding the free and reduced lunch form and the request to explain to the public, why that was important and how that's changed a little bit. So here's the response. Previously, in order to receive free school lunch or a reduced cost for lunch, you needed to fill out the form and you needed to qualify based on socioeconomics. So in the state of California, that's changed over the last couple of years, and food is available for everyone. So what that has done for us is it has not created the same motivation to fill the form out, because everybody's going to get lunch anyway. Why do I need to fill the form out? Well, we really need to, as a community, we need to revision what that form is for, because it's not just for free and reduced lunch to get the free lunch. Everybody has that now, but it has a significant impact to certain programs of ours that we get funding for. So as a community, we should all be looking at that form and filling that form out, because it's not just for lunch. And if we don't meet the right thresholds for students and families who qualify for free and reduced lunch, then what happens is we could be in jeopardy of losing some Title I funding. And we are getting that message out. Dr. Kanapik has come to cabinet with data the last few cabinet meetings to show that in a short time we've made some gains that we're pretty proud of. And I think it's just a matter of communicating with the public why that form is important and why we should be filling it out. Yeah, and it's an important thing to state that that information is 100% completely confidential. So I want to assure our public that when you fill out that form, you don't have to worry about that information getting shared in any way.
A question in the chat: can we ask all teachers to send the forms home for extra credit? I love the intent behind that question, but that's not a process we would be able to do to tie academic grade to whether or not they qualify or complete that form. But we are looking at creative options. So if you have ideas on how we can get more participation, we'd love to hear those. Is there a plan to deal with declining enrollment? Is it more about a lack of housing in Burbank or lack of birth rates? And the answer to that is both. When it comes to Burbank, the birth rate issue is actually both issues to some degree are Southern California issue. We are not the only districts with declining enrollment or declining birth rates. That's across the board in this region. We have families relocating. So housing is part of the issue, but there's trends in population that are pretty significant and pretty consistent with a lot of school districts in our area. Yeah, and we have Andy Cantwell on the call if he would like to contribute, because he's kind of a guru in this area of late.
Robin, I think it was well said. It is a both and. Our lack of housing directly relates to the declining birth rates. Birth rates in Burbank have declined by more than 33% over the past 8 years. And so, again, that's a macro demographic shift as far as the timing and frequent, number of births that individuals choose to have. But it's also a reality of we just are not able to support with the local housing young families and the needs that they may have in this community. So it's definitely both and. Well said, Robin.
We had a question about if we're able to send the paper forms home to all households. We do currently collect the applications online, and we do have paper forms available at all of our school sites. We'd have to look into that to see if we would see a significant increase in applications if we were able to provide that. So that would probably need to collect more data before we commit resources to that. But again, great suggestions. We've also are having conversations about including it in our parent data confirmation process and what our options are as far as making that part of that packet for parents to complete. So we would love for all of our families to consider it, complete it at the beginning of the school year. But we've been campaigning for the last couple months to increase participation in that program. Yeah, special plugin. We had a few sites that recently crossed a threshold to ensure Title I funding, which is really exciting. Some work been done at the sites, but also from the district level to make sure parents are aware of all the benefits of completing that application. But specifically, we have one school site that we're trying to support to get across that threshold, and that's Dolores Huerta Middle School. So they're campaigning hard right now as we speak to get additional families to complete that form and qualify so that they can retain their funding, their full Title I funding.
Mr. Cantwell, I have a question I need your help with. If the district found $11 million in June and didn't realize they had it, how was it spent so quickly that you now have to cut $5 million? $5 million.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Brahma. So when the board was working on the budget adoption for 22 or 23-24, we realized that we'd been over budgeting during the 22-23 fiscal year by approximately $11 million. So I want to make sure it's understood when we talk about a lost money, it was not lost, but rather we were over budgeting in that amount. As we were preparing the budget for this year, we identified that we had been over budgeting. We corrected that. We had made commitments, though, to our partners, both the CSEA and BTA, our teachers and our classified employees, to try to improve compensation based on an assumption of the older funding model, the older budget. And so once we identified those funds, half of the funds that had been over budgeted were immediately sent out to increase wages for our staff. So of the 11 million, about $5.5 million were given back to staff this summer to acknowledge that this board has said that we see funding and supporting increased compensation for our staff is a top priority. However, before that error was identified, we had actually anticipated a number that we'd have to cut about $13 million. So the $13 million has been reduced by 6, or reduced down to 6 million. And so again, the reason that it went from 13 million to 6 was about half of the money that was identified as being over budgeted was able to help reduce the gap, and the other half went to support staff compensation.
Thank you, Mr. Cantwell. Another comment in the chat, can we do a raffle for applications? Everyone who turns it in wins a prize. Again, that's challenging because we're not supposed to specifically identify these students in front of their peers or even our staff. So again, the intent, great, just have some limitations on what we can do. So just want to reiterate, we are seeking your input on this survey. We want you to encourage other parents, community members, all of our partners to complete it so we can get as much participation in this process. We will be sharing that information out. We will have a meeting in December on the 13th to share more specifics about our budget and share the results from that survey, as well as the conversations that we've had with our leadership and different staff and within the organization. Take that information to start preparing or planning for the spring as far as what we need to execute to be budget solvent. In the spring, January, February, we will deep dive into our various goals, look at those metrics to see, are we making the progress we intend and want? And do we need to reevaluate how we're supporting these students? So appreciate everyone's time this evening. Please again, reach out to any of our district administrators or staff if you have questions, and we look forward to your input and seeing you at the next meeting.
Thank you.